Prologue. Tai-san took a moment to watch the sun ascend over the distant hills, casting its warm glow all around her, spreading beams of light across the darkness of the surrounding countryside, bringing the dawn of a new day. Grasping the wooden handle of the rusty scythe in her hands, her fingers sore and aching from the many splinters, blisters, and cuts she had suffered, Tai-san braced herself for the heavy work ahead. It was harvest time, and she was to reap the crop she herself had planted, what felt like an eternity ago. She had been awoken in the very early hours of the morning by her captors, and taken to the field so she could begin her manual toil. It was the same routine she had gone through for how many months? She did not know. All feeling of time passing had long since gone, each day rolling into the next in an endless cycle of slave labor. It was a miracle the crop had grown as well as it had, Tai-san felt, admiring the corn that now circled her. Proud that she had brought life to such a barren and inhospitable land, the field having been nothing more than an empty patch of earth when she first arrived. "Thank you," Tai-san whispered to the corn, her voice hoarse and throat dry from the endless billowing of dust. But it was also in gratitude to the spirits of the elemental world as she sliced the first gathering of the harvest and gave thanks to nature for what it had provided. The sounds of swishing and swirling of farm implements held by her fellow slave workers filled the air as work began in earnest, joining the morning chorus of birdsong. Tai-san glanced at the birds fluttering overhead in the dawn sky. Would she ever be like them, free to go where she wished, to do as she chose, like she had been once before? Or was her life to be forever one of captivity, a prisoner to others seeking to make her an instrument of their will? How she wished she could soar above like the birds and escape her plight. She had thought about escaping many times, but there were too many guards. Her captors were well organized and disciplined. No prisoner had ever successfully escaped. All who had tried had been punished severely, with the result that other slave workers were also collectively reprimanded, even if they were innocent, to discourage any further attempts. Tai-san couldn't take the selfish path and try and secure her own freedom because she knew that by doing so, other prisoners would suffer as a consequence, especially if she succeeded in making an escape. There was to be no getting away. Not yet. Some of the other slave workers nearby were already exhausted, for all it was the start of a new day, and cried out, having received a kick from the guards to signify there would be no respite from their expected toil. But any weeping was probably more due to the fact that most had lost all hope, their spirits crushed, bodies aching, their tears watering the dusty soil. Tai-san worked steadfastly, though. She refused to let her plight get the better of her. She still had her pride, dignity, her inner essence. She hadn't lost herself or her identity, and long ago resolved that her captors would not break her. Somehow, she would pull through. Nature was sustaining Tai-san, enriching her life force, bringing her solace, perspective, and inner peace. The sun on her face, the birds singing, the plants and insect life all around her, the power, energy, and sounds of the natural world drowned out whatever inner anxieties Tai-san had about her own fate, any fears of the future. She was part of a bigger picture, aware of her connection to the earth itself. Nothing could extinguish Tai-san's own inner fire, quell her unbreakable spirit. Her captors had taken away Tai-san's freedom and her time, but she would not allow them to take away or infiltrate her soul, her hopes, or her dreams of what still could be. The sun would rise again, Tai-san knew, And in that new dawn, there would always be a future. There was something greater in life that no physical captivity could ever imprison. Her spirit was free. Suddenly, Tai-san heard the sounds of an approaching vehicle and looked around to see a van moving at speed, churning up clouds of dust. It was the first vehicle Tai-san had seen for a long time. She had lived in isolation with her fellow slaves under the watchful eyes of the overseers and usually didn't see any outsiders. As the van skidded to a halt, the door on the side opened and several guards jumped out to be met by the overseers. Tai-san continued scything in the harvest, glancing out of the corner of her eye, wondering what it all signified. She heard an animated conversation taking place between the overseers and the new guards. They, like Tai-san's fellow prisoners, were all about the same age. Tai-san did not understand the language they spoke. She was far from home in a foreign land, but there was no need to. It was clear from the tone of the voices that there was something of importance going on. One of the overseers was now pointing at her, and the guards began walking towards Tai-san, a sense of purpose in their stride. Tai-san wondered why she alone, out of the other slaves, had aroused their interest. "What do you want?" Tai-san asked, instinctively feeling threatened, her voice raspy, staring defiantly. It was pointless to ask, she reflected, since it was unlikely the guards also spoke her language. The guards encircled her. Heavily outnumbered, she considered using the scythe in her hands as a weapon in self-defense. In a split second, the guards lunged, seizing Tai-san by the arms, one of them squeezing her wrist, forcing her to drop the scythe on the ground. Tai-san protested, struggling and squirming to get away as she was lifted up into the air. The guards grabbed her by her legs and carrying her. Tired, weak, and emaciated, there was nothing she could do to get out of their clutches. She was blindfolded, and a cloth was tied around her mouth, suppressing Tai-san's desperate cries. None of the other slaves came to her aid, too intimidated by their captors to offer assistance, and they watched as Tai-san was carried by the guards into the van, the door quickly closing heavily behind her. The vehicle took off at speed, accelerating away, leaving behind the billowing dust receding in the slave fields that had for so long been Tai-san's home. Over the ensuing days, Tai-san had been taken some distance to a different city, and then placed in a well-guarded house full of other prisoners, but had been kept apart from them in a solitary room, the door locked at all times. Her abductors had fed her amply and cleaned her up. Her long, mottled, filthy, tangled hair had been washed, the dust and dirt from her previous existence as an agricultural slave washed away. The food she was given was most welcome, as was the feeling of being clean. Well treated as she had been, ultimately she was still a captive, however, and felt she had exchanged one form of slavery for another. Her hopes were raised that something else might be in store when a female jailer brought Tai-san a fresh change of clothes, exchanging the rags she wore for a pretty dress. Her fingernails were manicured, a flower tastefully arranged in her hair. Tai-san had even had some makeup put on her face, accentuating her natural physical beauty. The intentions of her captors became clearer when she was taken later in the day to a public gathering in a street, in a city Tai-san did not recognize, along with the rest of the prisoners from the slave house. Tai-san and the other slaves had been manacled together in chains and were paraded before an assembled crowd, the onlookers eyeing the slaves with interest, assessing them. So it was to be an auction, Tai-san realized. She was to be put up for sale. One by one, the slaves were presented to the audience, the auctioneer leading the proceedings, surveying the crowd as hands shot up, arms were waved, bids called out. It was a cacophony of noise, a disorderly mess of baying and shouting until an eventual price was settled for each captive on offer. But the currency wasn't money. Instead, bids ranged from goods to resources, equipment to territory, even various promises and favors. Soon it was Tai-San's turn, the last of the prisoners in line. A hush descended on the crowd as she took center stage, the most attractive-looking of all the slaves available, her bright dress billowing in the breeze, Tai-San capturing the attention of all. She felt exposed, ashamed, like a possession, a piece of meat, someone else's toy. She tried to retain her poise and dignity, but there was something inhuman about it all. This was a denial of her very will, her human rights, and there was nothing she could do about it. Overwhelmed by superior numbers and the occasion, Tai-San wished she could become invisible and disappear from the attentive stares of the crowd focused on her, escape from what was unfolding. She tried to look away, but one of her captors forced Tai-San's head up so all the onlookers could see her delicate, pretty features. The auctioneer signaled, beginning the auction. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of excited bidding, the interest in Tai-San swelling to a crescendo. Bids and offers quickly reached record levels, passing the value of all the other slaves. Tai-San felt like an alien on a different planet, lost in a foreign land. Alone, helpless, she still couldn't understand the various languages being used by the crowd, a multitude of accents and words beyond her comprehension, but she was aware the next phase of her fate would be decided by whoever emerged as the highest bidder. From somewhere in the throng, a voice shouted out what was clearly an enormous bid, making themselves heard over all the yelling. The bid included an ongoing supply of food, but more vital in this dangerous world, the promise of protection. The auctioneer leaned forward, scanning the sea of faces for whoever had called out the offer, amazed by the price Tai-San was getting, and finding the owner of the voice, a girl just slightly younger than Tai-San. The auctioneer prompted, and the girl repeated her bid in confirmation. The other buyers settling down as they realized they could not match the huge value just now bid. The auctioneer's grin conveyed his delight at the massive offer Tai-San had garnered. He would receive a percentage of the food as a commission, likewise the protection, and was already working out how he might trade this throughout his network, which extended far and wide. Clanging a gong, he indicated that the auction was over. The crowd slowly began to disperse. Tai-San was separated from the other slaves who had been sold, her guards putting new binders on her wrists and ankles, readying her to be handed over. Tai-San's fate had taken a new turn. She felt trepidation at what lay in store, as the girl who had bought her at the auction led her new possession along, pulling the chain bound around Tai-San's wrists. They were making their way, flanked by guards, through what had once been a luxury resort located outside the city, the Gardens of the East. Tai-San noticed the name on a sign at the entrance when they arrived, visible in various languages, representing the international clientele who had obviously once frequented it in the old adult world. Unlike the city of the slave traders in which she had just been sold, with its graffiti and decay, so similar to Tai-San's own home city, the Gardens of the East was like a paradise, a stunning complex left over from the adult times and mostly intact, a refuge from the chaotic and dangerous world outside. In the main courtyard, ornate fountains spouted water into the air, the lawns were manicured, the gardens tended to, neat and orderly, well-cut hedges trimmed to perfection, in a variety of shapes showing the care and privilege of whoever lived there, as well as the power and influence they must wield in order to live such a luxurious way of life amidst all the poverty, anarchy, and disorder. Everywhere Tai-san looked, there were trappings of wealth. From what once would have been expensive items of antiquity, sculpture, and furnishings, to more modern trinkets and gadgets of the adult technological age, with various still functional computers and high-tech gear visible throughout the resort. Whoever lived at the Gardens of the East was clearly rich and powerful. They had a large staff, many servants, or likely slaves, Tai-san thought, working hard to maintain the impeccably high standards so obviously expected of them. And more impressive and also ominous than the quantity of servants was the number of guards. The resort had effectively its own private army, standing watch on duty to protect whoever was inside. As they continued on, Tai-san was amazed by the scale and beauty of it, a materialistic perfection all around her, such a change from the basic peasant conditions she had been so used to in her life of late, tending the fields, growing the crops for her previous captors. They passed a servant girl meticulously scrubbing the floor of the outdoor courtyard. Was that it, Tai-san thought, speculating if her fate was to become a servant girl of some kind? Or was there something more chilling awaiting her, Tai-san dreaded, passing a mirror in a corridor and gazing at her own reflection, wondering if her beautiful dress was the first step to her becoming a concubine of some sort, to be pressured to give some other form of labor and attention to whoever was the master of the house, providing favors in exchange for food and lodging, and perhaps even in exchange for her life? They reached two ornate doors at the end of the corridor, the girl who had bought Tai-san knocking politely. A voice within answered. The doors opened. Tai-san was led inside. It was a palatial suite, the centerpiece being an indoor pool glistening with clear water in the large room, itself full of stunning high-quality furniture, Persian rugs, exotic statues. A banquet table was set out, covered in an abundance of fresh fruit and food of various cuisines, prepared by an expert chef. Sitting in the center of the suite was a teenager around Tai-san's age, reclining in a leather office chair, sitting by a desk covered in paperwork, several computer monitors. He watched impassively as Tai-san was led towards him. He was flanked by servants who waved palm frond fans above his head, keeping their master cool with a constant gentle breeze.
Vamos, tráiganla aquí, siéntenla ahí. Fuera, ya no los necesito.
He spoke to the girl who had bought Tai-san, giving an order in a language Tai-san didn't understand. The girl bowed dutifully, exiting the room with her guards, followed by all the servants who had been there, closing the impressive doors behind them as they left, leaving Tai-san standing alone with only this mysterious figure in the suite. Getting up from his desk, the unknown master advanced towards Tai-san. He hadn't taken his eyes off her and stared, considering her, analyzing in deep thought. Tai-san couldn't help but involuntarily flinch as he approached, each step that brought him nearer bringing her closer to finding out what was to be her fate. "Who are you?" Tai-san asked warily, before realizing he probably didn't understand her language, or so she thought.
I am the one you're destined to meet,
the stranger said, pulling the flower away from Tai-san's hair, causing it to unravel, cascading down on her shoulders, before taking hold of her gently by the hand and undoing the binders around her wrists, unlocking them with a key, the cuffs clattering to the ground.
There,
he said, removing the binders around Tai-san's ankles and standing back to admire her.
You're free.
Somehow, I don't think so. Tai-san ventured suspiciously. I'm not here by my choice.
But you have a choice,
he said, sitting down and taking his place again at his desk, typing in on his computer. Tai-san cautiously held her ground, but couldn't resist a glance at the banquet of food just out of arm's reach.
Go ahead. Eat. That's why it's there.
I'm not hungry, Tai-san replied, though in truth she was ravenous, the prospect of food tantalizing.
Try the fruit. It was handpicked this morning.
No doubt by slaves, Tai-san thought. Still, she had to eat. Her body was crying for energy. And advancing toward the banquet table, she picked up an apple, biting into it, savoring the sweetness, the taste. The stranger tapped data into his computer.
Tai-san. That's T-A-I-S-A-N. Is that how I spell your name?
The stranger asked, entering in data. Tai-san turned and considered the stranger in a mixture of growing fear and confusion. My name? How did you know my name?
I know a lot about you and your tribe, the mole rats.
How could anyone this far from home know anything about the mole rats? About her?
And none of the images do you justice.
The mysterious figure complimented, continuing to search on his computer before casting an admiring glance at Tai-san.
You're a lot more impressive in real life.
Suddenly, multiple images of Tai-san appeared on banks of monitors spread around the walls of the cavernous room. Then, as the stranger continued typing, keying commands, various other multiple images were displayed. Familiar faces from her past, people she hadn't seen for too long. Only in her memories, her dreams, images of Ryan, Patsy, Paul, Alice, Casey, Danny, other members of her old tribe, the Mallrats. Tai-san gazed around incredulously and turned to the stranger. Who are you? She asked. For all her anxiety and fear, she felt anger rising. Had this individual had something to do with the disappearance of her friends and loved ones? Were they still alive? In captivity somewhere? What had happened to them?
I'm a collector, a gatherer, shall we say, of valuable commodities, knowledge and information.
He gazed at Tai-san intently, studying her expression, all charm lost from the tone of his voice.
And I just need one piece of information right now. But first, do you want to live?
Tai-san exchanged glances with the stranger and nodded, wondering where all this was leading, especially when he keyed in another command. And multiple images of a satellite dish from the Eagle Mountain Observatory enveloped the entire room.
Then I suggest you tell me everything. Tell me all that you know about Eagle Mountain.